You have just heard the trumpeting of an African elephant, and this is part 3 of Among the Elephants, Africa's Gentle Giants, the final episode of our elephant mini-series from Our Wild World. Welcome to Our Wild World. I'm your host, Dr. John David Alferts. I've been an educator for over 38 years, serving as an adjunct professor, superintendent, principal, and teacher. Whenever we can, my wife Christina, also an educator, and I are trekking into the wild to see our two-legged, four-legged, and winged friends in the animal kingdom. Together we've been entertained by a mountain gorilla in the impenetrable forest as she played on the stomach of her napping silverback dad. We've been startled by the thunderous roaring of two aggressive hippos in the Okavango Delta as they fought behind our tents, shaking the ground as they did so. We've had a curious African lion lie down outside our tent as she played with our tent bag. While hiking in the bush at Lake Tanganyika, I've come within 75 yards of an elephant family drinking from a stream. At Samburu National Park in Kenya, Christina and I came eye to eye with a black mamba who lifted herself up just 12 feet from us, warning us that she was about to strike. After all my time in the bush, I have a story or two to tell. So it makes sense that I'm combining my passion for teaching with my passion for wildlife to launch Our Wild World, introducing listeners to, as the Lakota would say, Bitakuye Oyasen, or all our relations in the animal world. Each episode is meticulously researched and includes my first-hand observations from the bush. I think you'll find it's a podcast like no other. As you listen, be sure to check out our sister social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky for photos and videos that Christina and I have taken of the wildlife featured in each podcast episode. And now, let's begin. In this special 3-part Among the Elephants, Africa's Gentle Giants mini-series from Our Wild World, we are exploring the savannah elephants of Africa. If you've missed the first 2 episodes, I recommend you go back to listen to them before starting this episode. In part 3, we will further explore elephant adolescence. We'll talk about the importance of play, and I'll share a special encounter we had with elephants at Masai Mara. I'll give some recommendations on the best parks in Africa to see elephants, as well as some great books and films about elephants. We'll explore the threats to elephant survival and the organizations working to save them, including my visits to the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust and especially to save the elephants at Samburu National Reserve. Elephant adolescence lasts approximately as long as human adolescence, roughly from 12 to 20 years old. As with humans, females enter puberty before males do, generally about the age of 11. When they enter puberty, males and females begin to act differently. Dr. Cynthia Moss, who has studied elephants at Amboseli National Park in Kenya for nearly 60 years, has found that female elephants, generally around the age of 9, begin to show a much greater interest in the younger elephants in their family, standing near them, touching them, and mothering them. These big sisters are already learning the skills they will need to be successful mothers themselves someday, and matriarchs of their own family groups. Males, on the other hand, begin to play rougher when they hit adolescence and will pretend to mount the females and their families. Once males begin to enter mast, a period of high testosterone levels, they become more difficult for the matriarch to manage, resulting in their eventual departure from their family group. This generally occurs for the male around the age of 16. They then join other young adolescent boys in a group generally led by a patriarchal father figure who furthers their education on how to behave with other elephants. As with human children, play is an important part of any elephant's upbringing. When a young male elephant wants to play with another male of similar age, he holds his trunk high up in the air and presents it to the other as an invitation. Most often, his next move would be to place his trunk over the other's head, which in adults signals dominance, but in calves is guaranteed to precipitate a spirited sparring match. These encounters run the gamut from gentle shoving to intense headbutting and pushing back and forth, with trunks intertwining and tusks clacking. The fun continues for seconds to minutes for youngsters. For older teens and young adults, it can go on much longer. The sparring matches provide bulls with the opportunity to test their fighting ability so that they might successfully compete for a female when they reach sexual maturity. When playing, elephants will sometimes look for an object, perhaps a stick or a branch that the elephant will carry or throw with its trunk. In captivity, elephants enjoy playing with balls or hauling inner tubes around for fun. Elephants are fascinating to watch. They are always doing something. At Tarangire, I observed elephant youngsters pretending to mount each other and playing tug-of-war with their trunks. While at the Tara River, watching great families cross, the adolescents seemed to really enjoy the sand. It must have felt good to their soft foot pads and was probably cooling on a hot day. Some of the adolescents rolled in the sand. A few even laid in it, seemingly trying to bury themselves in it. One adolescent playfully pretended to mount a very young elephant. One of the females in the group, perhaps his mother, trumpeted and chased him away, scolding him. He was basically in timeout for a few minutes. Every time he tried to return, the mother chased him off again. Elephants love to swim, and a lake or a river can provide a great area to play. At Tsavo East, my wife and I watched a group of bulls at a large watering hole, really more of a small lake. Several adolescents had completely immersed themselves as they played in the water. One adolescent dunked the other, resting his front legs on his back to do so. The dunked bull raised only his trunk to breathe. Then they were splashing each other again and pulling on each other's trunks. All good fun. When a big bull came to the lake, the patriarch of the bachelor herd, the adolescents tried to entice him to come into the water too, but he was having none of it. Elsewhere, a hippo in the lake avoided the playful elephants, though he didn't seem overly bothered by them either. You can see pictures of elephants at play, as well as videos of some of the scenes I've described, on our accompanying social media pages. Every trip to Africa is incredibly memorable, with each trip having its own highlights. My wife and I have now been to Africa together 5 times, and I've spent a summer there before we were married. But sadly, every trip must come to an end eventually. In 2024, Chris had climbed Kilimanjaro, and I had seen great herds of elephants at Tarangire and hiked to have my own personal encounter with them at Lake Manyara. Together, Chris and I had visited Masai National Park in Tanzania, where George Adamson's assistant, Tony Fitzjohn, had reintroduced wild dogs and rhinos. Then we crossed into Kenya, where we visited Tsavo East and West, Amboseli, and finally Masai Mara. It was a wonderful trip, filled with many great elephant sightings. Masai Mara is perhaps the best place in East Africa to see the big cats. Smaller than the Serengeti, with more water, lions, cheetahs, and leopards, as well as hyenas, can be found there. But it's much harder to see elephants. I knew that Masai Mara would be our last opportunity to see the elephants that I love so much. We spent 2 glorious days at Masai Mara, and we saw a cheetah with her cubs, an elusive leopard, lions on the hunt, jackals and hyenas, as well as giraffes, but no elephants. Would they come out to say goodbye to us? On our last day, all day long, I kept sending my telepathic messages to elephants, hoping somehow they could pick them up through infrasound, begging them to come out and wish us goodbye. We had one more park on our itinerary, Nairobi National Park, but I knew there were no elephants there. Masai Mara would be our last opportunity to see them. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. The day was nearly over. Our incredible guide, Rufus Kimani, who works for Nairobi's Game Trackers Ltd., a longtime reputable local safari operator, asked if we wanted to stay a bit longer or call it a day. Well, you already know the answer to that question. We started down the road, and I said, "Elephant!" We saw one in the trees. Then we spotted a family on the move behind the trees in the savannah. Rufus drove us over there. I counted 14 elephants in all, including juveniles, and a couple of tiny babies in the family. I did my best to send my messages of love to the elephants. One elephant, probably about 16, raised her trunk. Again, I believe this is a sign that the elephant is using their infrasound telepathic-like skills. She really seemed to be listening. Then she approached our vehicle, extraordinarily close. She was so close that we could have reached out to touch her. She walked around the vehicle, and then she stopped alongside my wife and I. She again raised her trunk. She seemed to be looking right into our eyes. As she stood there, we could hear her soothing rumbles. Another family member followed her, and then another. The whole family passed by us in a close procession. Without a doubt, they had come to say goodbye. I've never seen elephants approach tourists so close in a vehicle before, so intently studying them. It was so incredibly special and absolutely unexplainable. I think both Chris and I had tears in our eyes. We had been given a very special goodbye indeed. If I learned anything from my time among the elephants, it is the extent to which we are kin. The warmth of their families makes me feel warm. Their capacity for delight gives me joy. Their ability to learn and understand things is a continuing revelation for me. If a person can't see these qualities when looking at elephants, it can only be because he or she doesn't want to. Douglas Chadwick wrote in his excellent book, The Fate of the Elephants. Elephants are so incredibly loving, empathetic, and understanding. At Kenya's Samburu Nature Reserve, and again at Tarangire, I have seen elephants carefully walk across a river, making sure they don't step on a Nile monitor. They coexist with every other animal, and they don't want to hurt anyone. Stories abound of elephants aiding a wounded human in the bush. I trust elephants more than I trust a lot of people. Of course, you may also hear an occasional story of a rogue elephant attacking a vehicle or harming a human being. While this very rarely ever happens, when it does, it is likely the result of the trauma that the elephant has endured from human beings, watching its family hacked to death, their tusks removed, and their bodies left to rot. Who wouldn't be angry? When I consider what humans have done to elephants, it's a wonder they forgive us at all. But they do. They who have suffered so much at the hands of humans never lose the ability to forgive, even though, being elephants, they will never be able to forget. Daphne Sheldrick, founder of the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust that has successfully raised and released over 300 elephant orphans, wrote in her book, An African Love Story, Love, Life, and Elephants. Elephants are clearly amazing sentient beings. They are also drivers of economic stability for the communities and nations they inhabit. Tourism, which is primarily wildlife-based, is a major contributor to the economies of East African and Southern African countries. In Kenya, tourism accounts for 12% of GDP, while in Tanzania it contributes to 17% of GDP. Wildlife watching makes up 80% of the annual sales of African tourist packages. Poachers diminish wildlife and therefore rob African countries of their wealth. To me, the death of an elephant is one of the saddest sights in the world. Ian Douglas Hamilton wrote in Among the Elephants. Dr. Douglas Hamilton went on to write that elephants, like humans, are tied by strong family bonds and will make frantic attempts to save a sick or dying relative. Elephants are well known to mourn the loss of their family members. Ian himself described while searching for elephant paths in the Marang forest one day, he heard the loud crying of an elephant calf in distress about 100 feet up the escarpment. He cautiously approached the source of the noise with his assistant, Moja. They discovered an adult female had apparently lost her balance, stepping into a pig hole. Had fallen and rolled out of control, unable to stop herself, down the slope and over a cliff. Somehow her 3 calves had found her, but now she was dead. The eldest was moaning quietly, but every so often gave vent to a passionate bawl. The second just stood dumbly motionless, head resting against their mother's body. The smallest calf, less than a year old, made forlorn attempts to suck from her breasts. Then the eldest knelt down and pushed her head and small tusks against the corpse in a hopeless attempt to move it, Hamilton wrote. Perhaps it isn't surprising that elephants would want to bury other dead elephants when they come across their cadavers on the savannah. But elephants don't just stop there. If they see another dead animal, or even a dead human, they will often bury them as well. Using their tusks and trunks, they bury the bodies with earth and vegetation. In her classic book, Portraits in the Wild, Dr. Cynthia Moss wrote about Ugandan park officials who had collected the ears and feet of dead elephants and stored them in a shed to be sold later for making handbags and umbrella stands. One night, a group of elephants broke into the shed and they buried the ears and the feet. The people involved still feel uncomfortable about the incident, Dr. Moss wrote. When coming across another dead elephant, which happens far too often considering the poaching crisis that they have endured, an elephant will often fondle and examine the bones, and especially the tusks, of the dead elephant. Dr. Moss wrote that elephants will often carry the bones and tusk away, sometimes a mile or more from the carcass. It has been seriously considered that the elephants know their companions are being killed for their tusks, and that they carry the tusks away to hide them. What is more, tusks have been found smashed against rocks, Dr. Moss wrote. How pathetic humans must seem to elephants that we would kill their families simply to take their teeth. How sick can you be? Sadly, elephants have been dying on an industrial scale in the latter part of the 20th century. Why? Because of mankind's insatiable greed. The world has been experiencing an elephant genocide. In the early 1800s, there was an estimated 27 million elephants. By 1900, the start of the 20th century, that number had dropped to 10 million. 80 years later, in 1979, there were still 1.3 million. Today, the latest aerial surveys of Africa reveal a population of only 415,000 African elephants, with about 35 to 45,000 Asian elephants. We've lost 26.5 million elephants since the 1800s, with only 415,000 African elephants and 35 to 45,000 Asian elephants remaining. Year after year, through the 1970s and 1980s, elephant herds were gunned down at a pace not seen since the bison massacre on America's frontier, Douglas Chadwick wrote in The Fate of the Elephant. Unfortunately, the genocide only got worse after his book's publication in 1992. In the last 7 years, the world has lost another third of its elephants. They say an elephant is being poached every 25 minutes. That means an elephant has died just while you were listening to this podcast. We've lost 26.5 million elephants and driven the population to the brink of extinction in just 200 years. Humans should be ashamed of themselves. We have committed a genocide on this magnificent species, primarily because of our insatiable appetite for their teeth, their ivory. It's a sickness. It's disgusting. Anyone who buys ivory has blood on their hands and is robbing future generations from seeing one of the greatest beings to ever walk this planet. Because of severe poaching and habitat loss, some national parks have seen an increase in the number and density of elephants. Elephants are, as we have seen, incredibly intelligent and will migrate to the parks where they are safe. Periodically, particularly in Zimbabwe and Namibia, culling has been used as a method to prevent so-called elephant overcrowding of national parks. Culling is a deplorable and unnecessary practice and can be excused for corrupt governments to acquire stockpiles of ivory to sell. Because elephants have such emotional connections between families and herds, culling traumatizes them. In conducting a cull in South Africa, rangers will try to kill every last elephant within an area so that no elephant escapes to let others know what has happened. However, since elephants communicate with infrasound for up to 6 miles, this is an absolute unnecessary and barbaric practice. When left alone in a habitat with high density of elephants will often reduce their own reproduction, which, as we have seen, is very slow. It takes a mother 22 months to produce a calf. They will vary their diets and disperse, if necessary, on their own. Elephants are obviously intelligent and conscious. If you watch an elephant, you can sense that it is thinking. They are very emotional, Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton has said. Some countries, primarily in southern Africa, such as Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, Botswana, Cameroon, and Mozambique, have continued to allow trophy hunting of elephants. These countries, as well as the trophy hunters, sadly, most of them seem to come from the United States, claim that trophy hunting benefits conservation as the profits from the licenses sold can be used to protect the national parks and further conservation efforts. However, this does not take into account the corruption of so many African governments and officials who may sell more licenses than are environmentally sound. In addition, the trophy hunters usually seek out the largest tuskers to kill. As we've seen, elephant society is highly dependent upon the elders, both matriarchs and old bulls, so this has a detrimental impact on the young. Lawrence Anthony, the South African elephant whisperer, wrote about trophy hunters and their impact on elephants in his book, The Elephant Whisperer. I have never had a problem with hunting for the pot. Every living thing on this planet hunts for sustenance, one way or another, from the mighty microbe upwards. Survival of the fittest is, like it or not, the way of this world. But hunting for pleasure, killing only for the thrill of it, is to me an anathema. I have met plenty of trophy hunters. They all claim, of course, to be naturalists. They all know and love the bush, and they all justify their actions in conservation speak, peppered with all the right buzzwords. The truth is, though, that they harbor a hidden impulse to kill, which can only be satisfied by the violent death of another life by their hand, and they will go to inordinate lengths to satisfy, above all, justify, this apparently irresistible urge. Besides adding to the absurdity of their claims, there is not an animal alive that is even vaguely a match for today's weaponry. The modern high-power hunting rifle with telescopic sights puts paid to any argument about sportsmanship. Those who hunt old bulls don't or refuse to understand the harm they are doing. An aging elephant male is not something surplus to be dispatched by some meager trophy gatherer. He is a breathing reference library. He is there for the health and the well-being of future elephants. He teaches their youngsters who they really are, and he imparts priceless bush skills to succeeding generations. Thanks to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species ban on international elephant ivory trade in 1989 and the closing of the U.S., China, and European Union ivory markets, elephant poaching has decreased significantly. However, it still remains a threat. There's also still a concern that the ban on ivory trade will someday be lifted. Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Angola, Zambia, and Tanzania have repeatedly lobbied for the ban to be lifted, despite the documented elephant genocide. Fortunately, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species has so far refused to lift the ban. Still, habitat loss and human-elephant conflict, as well as climate change, remain major threats to elephants, along with ongoing poaching. Save the Elephants, part of the Wildlife Conservation Network, has done an outstanding job of monitoring elephant populations, assisting anti-poaching efforts, and reducing human-elephant conflict. Chris and I are longtime contributors to Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton's excellent organization, and along with it, the Elephant Crisis Fund, which he also started. We have been fortunate enough to visit Save the Elephants, the research facility at Kenya's Samburu Nature Reserve. We bush camped in the old Game Trackers Ltd. camp, less than 1 kilometer from the Save the Elephants research facility, both in 2018 and again in 2022. Save the Elephants has a great visitor center built with a donation from Chelsea Clinton, daughter of President Bill and Hillary Clinton. The outside display details how carbon dating is being used to identify pre-banned ivory from banned ivory. Personally, whether it's pre or post-ban, no one should want ivory. It belongs to elephants and no one else. Gilbert Sabinga, the camp manager at the research center, gave us a tour. Gilbert explained the efforts of Save the Elephants are doing to conserve elephants across Africa. He shared how Save the Elephants' sister organization, the Elephant Crisis Fund, supports other worthy elephant charities. Save the Elephants has been instrumental in reducing human-elephant conflict. For example, Save the Elephants has been working with farmers to hang beehives by wire on their farms. Elephants have thin skin and bee stings hurt, so they have a natural fear of bees. If an elephant tries to raid the crops on the farm, they'll shake the beehive fence, thus releasing hundreds of angry bees. The would-be crop raider will get out of there as soon as possible. Not only do the farmers avoid having the elephants raid their crops, they now also are able to harvest the honey and sell it at market. Save the Elephants Beehive program has resulted in a 70 to 80% reduction in human-elephant conflict on the farms that they've placed the hives. Save the Elephants is trying to introduce this ingenious method of reducing human-elephant conflict throughout Africa. Conservation won't work if the local communities aren't invested in it. Therefore, Save the Elephants creates jobs for unskilled local Samburu people as elephant spotters, field data collectors, tracking analysts, and camp managers. Scholarships are also awarded to the Samburu people to further their education. Gilbert himself benefited from such a scholarship and attended the University of Texas in the United States. And dear to Chris and my heart, with our background in public schools, Save the Elephants in 2025 donated 1.2 million school lunches to the school children of Samburu region to increase attendance and their welfare. Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton was nearly 82 years old in 2022. We had just missed him, Gilbert told us. An expert pilot, Dr. Douglas Hamilton had been at Save the Elephants Research Center at Samburu just the week before, flying to record herd movements. Sadly, Dr. Douglas Hamilton left us on December 8, 2025, but his work will live on. Any elephant who dies at Samburu is examined by Save the Elephants to determine the cause. Because there was a severe drought in 2022, sadly, elephants were being found dead, like the one that we saw who had crossed the arid landscape for miles to get a drink and had collapsed of exhaustion just as he finally reached a small pool of water. Gilbert brought us inside the facility, where we were able to see the work of the elephant tracking monitors up close. Sitting at their computers, the trackers monitor the radio-collared elephants 24/7 to record their movements. If a radio collar stays stationary for too long, the Save the Elephant monitors know something may be wrong, and they can contact park rangers, alerting them of possible poaching. We were so impressed with the work at Save the Elephants and so thankful for the Save the Elephants staff who do so much to help this magnificent species. Every dollar donated really is used wisely. As we said our goodbyes to Gilbert, we saw one of the Save the Elephants funded veterinarians pull up in their Land Rover. The veterinarians assist elephants as needed within the reserve. Our friend and guide on the safari, Rufus, was as impressed with the research center as we were, and he promised to tell future clients about the amazing work that they do there. Mahatma Gandhi, whose nonviolent resistance led to India's independence, once wrote, "The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. I hold that the more helpless a creature, the more entitled it is to protection by man from the cruelty of man." Although my wife Chris and I love all the African nations we have visited, we do consider Kenya to be our favorite, and indeed the greatest because of its commitment to conservation. Kenya, perhaps better than any other African nation, understands that its diverse wildlife is a part of its national heritage and identity. Visitors at Nairobi National Park, headquarters of the Kenyan Wildlife Service, are greeted by a plaque from Kenya's first president, Jomo Kenyatta, which states, "The government of Kenya fully realizes the value of its natural resources, pledges itself to conserve them for posterity with all means at its disposal." Sadly, they will also be greeted by a somber reminder of the price that Kenya's rangers have paid to save Kenya's wildlife. A memorial in front of the park bears the names of the Kenyan rangers who have died in the line of duty protecting Africa's vanishing wildlife. From 2006 to 2021, 1,535 Kenyan rangers have died in the line of duty. During that same time, internationally, 2,351 rangers have died, according to the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Being a park ranger, like being a conservationist, is a very dangerous job. According to Global Witness, in 2024, at least 146 conservationists were killed or disappeared while defending land, water, and forests. That brings the total to at least 2,253 deaths and disappearances since 2012. Conservationists die at nearly as high a rate as park rangers. Elephants lost a conservationist hero in 2017 when Wayne Lauder, whose work with the Paws Foundation helped stop poaching and the illegal ivory trade, was gunned down by poachers. The 51-year-old Lauder was being driven from the airport to his hotel when his taxi was stopped by another vehicle and two men opened the taxi's door, shooting him. Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton himself survived being shot at numerous times. Every ranger, every conservationist is a hero in my book, protecting our animal brethren for future generations. Daphne Sheldrick, the founder of the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, has said, "We need another, wiser, and perhaps more mystical concept of animals. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of their senses which we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren, they are not underlings, There are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of earth. Daphne walked the talk throughout her long life with the work she did at the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. She was the first conservationist to successfully be able to save orphaned elephants, finding just the right mix of milk to nurse them. Her Sheldrick Wildlife Trust in Nairobi, Kenya, has been featured on 60 Minutes and does amazing work. The orphanage has raised 322 orphaned elephants who have gone on to sire approximately 77 known babies of their own. Just as importantly, the Trust has provided emergency veterinary services to 14,392 animals in need. The Trust funds 29 anti-poaching teams that operate at Tsavo, Kulu, Meru, Coast, Galana, Kibwezi, and Mau forests. In 2024, they were responsible for 642 arrests. When I give my elephant presentations to school children, I often encourage their classes to adopt an elephant at the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust for $50 per year. When they do, they receive monthly updates on their orphan, which really helps to foster a love for elephants. The trust can be visited by foster parents and tourists in Nairobi by making advance reservations. It really is a special experience to see the keepers bring their procession of babies back to the facility after a day of being out in Nairobi National Park. The orphans are much loved, and a keeper sleeps in a bunk next to each baby every night. In the past, foster parents could even find the baby they adopted. The babies are so affectionate, they often reach out to touch their visitors with their trunks. Throughout this 3-part series, Among the Elephants, Africa's Gentle Giants, I have shared some of the amazing encounters my wife and I have had with the elephants. I urge you, I beg you, to please go to Africa and see these animals for yourselves. There's a saying with conservationists, if it pays, it stays. The national parks exist in Africa because they bring much-needed revenue to the country's gross national products and to the surrounding communities. Not only will you have an unforgettable experience, but the money you spend will also help save the species that you are seeing. And there's so many ways to visit Africa. Fewer people camp in the bush these days, as there are so many nice hotels in and out of the parks. You can stay in the fanciest hotels you can imagine, or you can stay in a very nice budget hotel. There's an accommodation for every pocketbook. For elephant watching, I recommend the following national parks where I've had great elephant experiences. In Kenya, Samburu Nature Reserve, Tsavo East and West, and Amboseli National Park. In Tanzania, Tarangire and Mukomazi National Parks. In Botswana, Chobe National Park, which has the largest concentration of elephants in the world. I highly recommend all of them. Many indigenous people believe that animal spirits can be a guide to us and teach us. In Hinduism and Buddhism, elephants are regarded as holy and as symbols of wisdom, strength, and good fortune. In Hinduism, the elephant deity, Lord Ganesha, is the remover of obstacles, known for wisdom and success, and is worshipped before new ventures. Elephant spirits teach us to be of service to the young and to the elderly, and to be loyal to our families, as well as to stay connected with the divine. Those who believe the elephant is their spirit animal may find great satisfaction in public service and have a great thirst for knowledge and understanding. They say elephant lovers make better lovers themselves. If you would like to read more about these amazing gentle giants, I encourage you to read Dr. Cynthia Moss's Elephant Memories and Carl Safina's Beyond Words. And Beyond Words, Carl Safina visits Amboseli and Dr. Moss, and it's kind of an update to Elephant Memories. Ian and Oria Douglas Hamilton's Among the Elephants, and Battle for the Elephants are both classics, as is Joyce Price's Elephants and Coming of Age with Elephants. I also encourage you to read Paula Kahumba's Secrets of the Elephants and watch the excellent National Geographic series. Alex Lasker wrote the novel I wish I could have written, called The Memory of an Elephant. Lasker's fictional work is the best novel I've ever read and manages to capture the magic of elephants with a thrilling tale. Douglas Chadwick's Fate of the Elephants is still an outstanding book and is a comprehensive look at elephants across the world. Lawrence Anthony's The Elephant Whisperer is also not to be missed. The brilliant wildlife photographers Derek and Beverly Joubert did an inspiring documentary on elephants for nature called Soul of the Elephant, as well as a wonderful Disney film called Whisperers, An Elephant's Tale, two of my favorite films on elephants. This episode is dedicated to Dr. Joyce Poole, who started her conservation work on behalf of elephants alongside Dr. Cynthia Moss at Amboseli in 1975. Dr. Poole started Elephant Voices, which continues to be responsible for groundbreaking research on elephant communication and may someday give us the ability to communicate directly with elephants. Dr. Poole reminds us, "We really need to do some deep reflection. You know, is this whole planet for human beings? And if it's just for human beings, how is it going to be if we kill off everything else? And I always say, if we can't make space for elephants, are we going to think about the frogs and the birds here? At least with elephants, everyone knows what an elephant is. They're so charismatic, they're so big. If we could save space for elephants, then we save, a myriad of other species, along with those ecosystems. But I think, that we need to really start looking at ourselves and what do we want for the future, for our children, for our grandchildren, and this beautiful world that we have." Ed Yong, in his brilliant book on animal senses, An Immense World, wrote, "We are closer than ever to understanding what it is like to be another animal, but we have made it harder than ever for those other animals to be. We need to make space for our brethren in the animal world, especially for elephants." I'll leave the final words, though, to filmmaker Derek Joubert, because they perfectly capture my own sentiments exactly. "I often think of myself as an elephant. I try to think their thoughts, live my life with their values. We definitely know that when we spend time with elephants, we come away somehow better." Finally, I would like to thank the elephants themselves. Thank you for allowing me to spend time with you and showing me how to be a better person. Whenever I am away from you, I long to be in your presence once again. If you were moved to help elephants from this podcast, then I encourage you to donate to Save the Elephants or the Elephant Crisis Fund, both started by Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton and affiliated with the Wildlife Conservation Network. They have the highest possible rating from Charity Navigator and Charity Watch. If you do donate, please mention this podcast. It just helps to build awareness of the podcast. This concludes our episode. Please be sure to check out our sister Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and X pages for accompanying pictures and videos that my wife and I have taken in Africa. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like it, follow it, and leave us a review. Be sure to tell your friends. New episodes are released every 3 weeks on Tuesdays. Please join me again for Our Wild World. You can contact me anytime at ourwildworldshow@gmail.com. I'm also available to give talks on many of the animals featured in this series. You can download a flyer with my available talks from our Facebook page. The talks are free. I do ask for a donation to a wildlife charity if it's possible. Thank you for listening, and remember, every breath that you take connects you with every other living being on this planet. You are a part of nature. Love it, protect it, and nature will never disappoint you, strengthening and healing you in return.